On May 9, 1945 at 11:47 in the morning, Private First Class Daniel Everett Brennan sat alone in a captured German barracks outside Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, while American soldiers celebrated victory in Europe 3 floors below. He was 23 years old, the only man from his original rifle platoon still alive. The war in Europe had ended one day earlier. Hitler was dead. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. Church bells rang across the Allied world. Champagne bottles opened in London and Paris. Soldiers embraced in the streets. The nightmare was over. Brennan heard the celebration through the floorboards. Laughter. Singing. The sound of boots dancing on wooden floors. Someone played an accordion. The music drifted up through the building like smoke. He sat on his bunk with his hands folded in his lap. He did not join them. His platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant William Kowalski, found him there 2 hours later. Kowalski was 32 years old, a replacement who joined the unit in February 1945. He didn't know the men who died before his arrival. Didn't carry their names in his memory. He stood in the doorway watching Brennan sit motionless in the dim afternoon light. "You coming down, Brennan?" "No, Sergeant. War's over. Boys want to see you." "I know, Sergeant." Kowalski waited. The accordion music continued below. Someone started singing "Don't Fence Me In" off-key. Others joined in. Their voices rose through the building like prayer. "What are you doing up here?" Kowalski asked. Brennan looked at his hands. Remembering. The sergeant stood there another moment, then left. His boots echoed down the stairwell. Brennan remained where he was. He would stay in that room until nightfall, alone, while his battalion celebrated the end of the war. This was not unusual behavior for Daniel Brennan. He had stopped celebrating anything 6 months earlier. The 28th Infantry Division had landed at Normandy on July 22, 1944, 6 weeks after D-Day. Brennan's unit, Company C, 2nd Battalion, 109th Infantry Regiment, had gone ashore at Utah Beach without opposition. The fighting had already moved inland. The beaches were quiet. Supply dumps and field hospitals covered the sand. Nobody was shooting at them. That first night in France, the platoon gathered around a small fire someone built from German ammunition crates. There were 42 men in the rifle platoon then. Brennan remembered all their faces. Private Joseph Gallagher from South Boston told jokes in a thick accent nobody fully understood but everyone laughed at anyway. Corporal Matthew Torres from El Paso played harmonica. Private Eugene Fisher from rural Wisconsin carved small wooden animals with his trench knife and gave them to local children. They thought they'd missed the worst of it. The breakout from Normandy was already happening. The hedgerow fighting was ending. Soon they'd be chasing Germans across France. It would be over by Christmas. That's what everyone said. Over by Christmas. The reality was different. The 28th Division moved east through France in late summer. They fought through the countryside. Small villages. Forest roads. River crossings. Every day brought contact with the enemy. Every night brought casualties. The platoon shrank slowly. 1 man wounded here. 2 killed there. Replacements arrived weekly, sometimes daily. New faces Brennan barely learned before they disappeared. By September, only 19 men from the original 42 remained. The rest were dead, wounded, or transferred. The platoon felt different now. Quieter. The jokes stopped. The harmonica stayed in Torres's pack. Nobody carved wooden animals anymore. On September 15, 1944, the 28th Division entered Germany near Roth. They were among the first American units to cross the German border. The Wehrmacht defenders fought with desperate intensity. Every farm. Every road junction. Every tree line became a battlefield. The Germans weren't retreating anymore. They were defending their homeland. The casualties increased. By October, only 7 men from Brennan's original platoon were still with the unit. Private Gallagher was one of them. Corporal Torres. Private Fisher. Sergeant Paul Richmond from Ohio, who'd led them since Normandy. Private Harold Chin from San Francisco. Private Robert Sullivan from Chicago. And Brennan. 7 men who'd landed together. Who'd trained together at Fort Meade before shipping out. Who knew each other's families. Who'd promised to look out for one another. 7 men from 42. They talked about it sometimes quietly after dark. How lucky they'd been. How they'd beaten the odds. How they'd make it home together when this was over. They didn't talk about the 35 who hadn't made it. That topic lived in silence. On November 2, 1944, the 28th Division moved into the Hürtgen Forest as part of a larger offensive toward the Roer River dams. The Hürtgen was 50 square miles of dense evergreen forest along the German-Belgian border. The trees grew so thick that daylight barely reached the forest floor. Artillery couldn't penetrate the canopy. Air support was useless. Radio signals couldn't penetrate. Visibility dropped to 25 yards. The Germans had fortified every ridge. Bunkers. Log obstacles. Minefields. Pre-registered artillery coordinates. The forest was a killing ground specifically designed to destroy attacking infantry. The 109th Infantry Regiment entered the Hürtgen on the morning of November 2nd. Company C advanced along a forest trail toward a village called Wassenack. They made 200 yards in the first hour before German machine guns opened fire from concealed positions in the trees. The next 2 weeks became a slow crawl through hell. The fighting in the Hürtgen Forest wasn't like anything Brennan had experienced in France. There were no clear front lines, no flanks, no rear area. The Germans were everywhere and nowhere. They attacked from positions Americans had already cleared. They called artillery onto coordinates they'd pre-registered months earlier. Tree bursts rained hot steel fragments down through the canopy. The explosions didn't crater the ground. They sliced horizontally through the air, cutting men apart. The forest floor was saturated with rain and blood. Foxholes filled with water faster than men could bail them out. Trench foot became epidemic. Hypothermia killed men who weren't wounded. The dead lay where they fell because recovery teams couldn't reach them under constant fire. Bodies disappeared into the undergrowth. Some were never found. On November 6th, Private Gallagher took shrapnel through his throat during an artillery barrage. He died in seconds. No medic could have saved him. The fragment severed his carotid artery. He bled out before anyone reached him. 6 men left. On November 9th, Corporal Torres stepped on a shoe mine, a small wooden anti-personnel mine the Germans buried everywhere in the Hürtgen. The explosion blew off both his feet at the ankles. He screamed until the morphine took effect. The medics couldn't stop the bleeding. He died during evacuation. 5 men left. On November 11th, Private Fisher caught a bullet through his chest while crossing a firebreak. Entry wound small. Exit wound the size of a fist. His lungs filled with blood. He drowned on dry land. It took 6 minutes. 4 men left. Private Chin died on November 13th when his platoon walked into a pre-registered mortar barrage. One moment he was there. The next moment he wasn't. The explosion vaporized him. They found pieces later and buried them in a poncho. 3 men left. Sergeant Richmond lasted until November 16th. He'd survived Normandy, the Hedgerows, the Siegfried Line, and 2 weeks in the Hürtgen. A sniper killed him while he was filling his canteen at a creek. Single shot through the temple. Instant death. He never saw it coming. 2 men left. On November 18, 1944, Private Robert Sullivan from Chicago sat next to Daniel Brennan in a foxhole along a ridgeline overlooking what remained of Wassenack. They'd been in the Hürtgen for 16 days. The 28th Division had suffered over 6,000 casualties. The 109th Regiment was combat ineffective. Companies that started with 150 men now fielded 30 or 40. Some units were down to 15. Sullivan and Brennan were the last. The last 2 from the original 42. They didn't talk about it. What was there to say? That afternoon, German artillery found their position. The first shells landed 50 yards short. The second salvo landed 25 yards over. The Germans were bracketing the ridge. The third salvo would land directly on them. Standard artillery procedure. Adjust. Adjust. Fire for effect. Sullivan looked at Brennan. We should move. Brennan nodded. They climbed out of their foxhole and ran along the ridgeline looking for better cover. The third salvo came in while they were exposed. 6 shells. 105 millimeters. The explosions walked across the ridge like footsteps. 1 shell landed between them. The blast threw Brennan 15 feet into a shell crater. He hit the frozen ground hard. His helmet flew off. His rifle disappeared. His ears rang so loud he couldn't hear anything else. He lay there stunned, struggling to breathe. The concussion had knocked the air from his lungs. He rolled onto his side and saw Sullivan. The shell had landed 3 feet from him. The explosion had shredded him. There wasn't enough left to bury. Just pieces scattered across the ridgeline. Blood on the snow. Fragments of uniform. A boot with the foot still inside. Brennan stared. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. Sullivan had been next to him 2 seconds earlier. Now he was gone. Simply gone. Brennan crawled back to his foxhole and climbed in. He sat with his back against the frozen earth. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat there while the ringing in his ears slowly faded and the sounds of the forest returned. The battle continued around him. Machine gun fire. Mortars. Small arms. Men shouting. The war didn't pause for one man's grief. He was alone now. The last one. The only survivor from his original platoon. All 41 others were dead. Every single friend he'd made in training. Every man he'd landed with at Normandy. Every soldier who'd promised to look out for him. Gone. And he was still here. That's when something changed inside Daniel Brennan. Something fundamental broke. Not his mind. Not his courage. Something deeper. Some essential understanding about fairness and meaning and why certain men live while others die. He'd survived and they hadn't. No reason. No logic. Just random chance. A shell landed 3 feet from Sullivan instead of 3 feet from him. That was the only difference between life and death. 3 feet of frozen German soil. The 28th Division withdrew from the Hürtgen Forest on November 21, 1944, after 19 days of combat. They'd advanced 3,000 yards. Every yard cost 2 American casualties. The division was pulled back to Luxembourg for rest and refitting. They needed replacements, equipment, time to recover. Brennan received a 7-day pass to Paris. Most soldiers in his situation would have been grateful. A week in Paris meant hot food, clean sheets, real beds and safety. No artillery. No snipers. No frozen foxholes. A week to forget the Hürtgen. He spent it alone in a room at a transient barracks on the outskirts of the city. He didn't visit the Eiffel Tower. Didn't drink at the cafes. Didn't meet French girls. He stayed in his room and stared at the wall. An army chaplain found him on the 4th day. Captain Morris Feldman, 34 years old, from Brooklyn. Feldman had heard about Brennan from the company clerk. The only survivor from his original platoon. 23 years old. Hadn't spoken more than a few words since leaving the Hürtgen. Feldman knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again. "Come in," Brennan said. The chaplain entered. Brennan sat on his bunk fully dressed in his classy uniform. Clean, pressed, proper. But his eyes were empty. Feldman had seen that look before. In other young men who'd survived when they shouldn't have. "Private Brennan?" "Yes, sir. I'm Chaplain Feldman. Mind if I sit?" "It's your building, sir." Feldman sat on the only chair in the room. A cheap wooden thing that creaked under his weight. He studied Brennan's face. No obvious wounds. No bandages. The damage was invisible. "How are you holding up?" Feldman asked. "Fine, sir." "That's not what I heard." Brennan didn't respond. "I heard you lost your entire platoon," Feldman said. "Not the entire platoon, sir. Just the original men. That's still 41 soldiers." 41 friends, sir." Feldman nodded. "Want to talk about it?" "No, sir." They sat in silence. Outside Paris lived its life. People walked the streets. Shops opened. Children played. The city had survived 4 years of occupation. Now it was free again. Life continued. It always continued. "You feel guilty," Feldman said quietly. Brennan looked at him for the first time. "How would you know what I feel?" "Because I've sat with 100 men like you in the past 2 years. Men who survived when their friends didn't. It's common. It's normal. And it's not your fault." "I didn't say it was my fault." "You didn't have to." Brennan turned back to the wall. "Respectfully, sir, you don't know anything about it." Feldman stood. He placed a card on the small table next to Brennan's bunk. "If you change your mind, that's where you can find me." He left. Brennan never looked at the card. 3 days later his pass ended. He returned to Luxembourg and rejoined what remained of Company C. The unit had received 87 replacements. New faces. Young men fresh from training. They looked at combat veterans like Brennan with a mixture of awe and fear. He was 23 years old but looked 40. His eyes had seen things theirs hadn't. Yet, the replacements wanted to hear stories. Wanted to know what combat was really like. Wanted advice on how to survive. Brennan wouldn't talk to them. He performed his duties. Followed orders. Kept his weapon clean. But he didn't socialize. Didn't share experiences. Didn't offer wisdom. One replacement, Private Eddie Morrison from Tennessee, tried especially hard to befriend him. Morrison was 19 years old. Eager. Optimistic. He saw Brennan as a mentor. Someone who could teach him how to stay alive. "Private Brennan, sir, I was wondering if you could show me how you zero your rifle. I heard you're the best shot in the company." "Ask someone else." "But everyone says you." "I said ask someone else." Morrison backed away, confused and hurt. The other replacements learned quickly. Brennan wasn't interested in helping them. Wasn't interested in being part of the unit. He was there in body but absent in spirit. On December 16, 1944, Germany launched its final major offensive through the Ardennes Forest. The Battle of the Bulge. The 28th Division, still recovering from the Hürtgen, suddenly found itself in the path of 3 German panzer divisions driving west toward the Meuse River. Brennan's company was positioned near a village called Marnach. The Germans hit them before dawn with overwhelming force. Tanks, artillery, infantry and winterweizen camouflage emerging from the snow like ghosts. The fighting was chaotic and desperate. Company C held for 6 hours before being overrun. Survivors retreated through the forest in small groups. Brennan ended up with 4 other men, none of whom he knew well. They moved west toward American lines, trying to avoid German patrols. They walked for 3 days through snow and freezing temperatures. No food except what they could scrounge from abandoned positions. No sleep except in 30-minute intervals. German soldiers were everywhere, flooding through the gap in Allied lines. On the second day, they encountered a group of 6 German soldiers warming themselves around a small fire. The Americans had the advantage. The Germans didn't know they were there. Brennan's group could have killed all 6 easily. Should have. That's what soldiers do in combat. But Brennan didn't fire. He signaled the others to move around the German position silently. They slipped past while the enemy soldiers laughed and smoked cigarettes 50 yards away. Later one of the Americans asked him why. Why what? Why didn't we engage them? Didn't need to. They were the enemy. They were 6 men trying to stay warm. Like us. The soldier didn't understand. Brennan didn't explain further. They reached American lines on December 19th, half frozen and exhausted. The company clerk marked them as survivors. Added their names to the roster of men who'd made it out of Marnik. Brennan's name appeared on yet another list of the living. By January 1945, the German offensive had been stopped. The Bulge was being reduced. Allied forces pushed east again. The 28th Division had been decimated a second time. Half their strength was gone. Again. Brennan received a promotion. Private first class. It came with a small pay increase and absolutely no satisfaction. He accepted the chevrons without comment. Sewed them on his uniform. Continued existing. Through January and February the division rebuilt again. New replacements. New officers. The slow grind of transforming civilians into soldiers. Brennan watched it happen from a distance. He performed his duties. Followed orders. Stayed alive. But something had calcified inside him. Some essential capacity for connection had hardened. He didn't make friends among the replacements. Didn't learn their names. Didn't ask where they were from. They would die anyway. Better not to know them. In March 1945, the 28th Division crossed the Rhine and drove deep into Germany. The Wehrmacht was collapsing. Organized resistance gave way to scattered fighting. Villages surrendered without a shot. The end was approaching. Brennan fought through it mechanically. He cleared buildings. Engaged enemy soldiers. Followed tactical doctrine. But the fire was gone. The purpose had evaporated. He understood rationally why the war needed to continue until Germany surrendered completely. But emotionally he was finished. Had been finished since November 18th in the Hürtgen. On April 28th, Company C liberated a small concentration camp near Landsberg. Brennan saw the prisoners. Walking skeletons. Humans reduced to bone and skin. Eyes that had witnessed hell. He felt nothing. His capacity for horror had been exhausted months earlier. Other soldiers broke down. Cried. Vomited. Screamed at the injustice. Brennan just documented what he saw. Helped distribute food. Provided security while medical personnel treated the survivors. Then moved on. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Official surrender. Complete capitulation. Victory. The celebration in Pilsen lasted 3 days. Soldiers drank captured German beer and schnapps. They sang songs. Danced with local Czech girls. Fired weapons into the air. The nightmare was over. Brennan spent those 3 days cleaning his rifle. Organizing his equipment. Writing letters he never sent. He felt no joy. No relief. Just a quiet emptiness that filled every moment like smoke. On May 12th, Battalion headquarters announced the point system for demobilization. Soldiers with enough points would go home first. Points were awarded for time in service, time overseas, combat decorations and wounds. Brennan had enough points to be among the first groups sent home. He received the news without emotion. Home felt as distant and unreal as Mars. In June, Brennan boarded a Liberty ship in Le Havre bound for New York. The voyage took 9 days. Most soldiers spent the trip playing cards, writing letters, talking about what they'd do when they got home. Brennan stood at the rail and watched the ocean. Another soldier joined him one afternoon. Corporal James Hartley, 109th Infantry Regiment, different company. He'd heard about Brennan. The soldier who'd survived when everyone else died. You're Brennan, right? Yeah. Heard you were the only one left from your original platoon. That's right. Hell of a thing. Brennan didn't respond. Must feel good though, Hartley continued. Making it through. Beating the odds. Brennan looked at him. Does it? Doesn't it? No. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like anything. Hartley backed away from the intensity in Brennan's eyes. He mumbled something about seeing him later and disappeared. Brennan returned to watching the ocean. The ship docked in New York on June 24, 1945. Brennan processed through Camp Kilmer in New Jersey. Medical examinations. Paperwork. Pay settlement. 60 days of leave before reporting for final discharge processing. He took a train to his hometown in Pennsylvania. A small coal mining town in the western part of the state. Population 3,400. Everyone knew everyone. Brennan's family had lived there for 3 generations. His mother met him at the station. She was 47 years old but looked older. The war had aged her like it aged everyone. She'd sent 4 sons to fight. 2 had come home. Brennan's older brother had been killed in North Africa in 1943. His younger brother had lost his left leg at Anzio. Now Daniel was home, physically intact but fundamentally altered. She hugged him. He stood stiff in her embrace. She stepped back and studied his face. Are you all right? She asked. I'm fine, Mom. You don't look fine. I'm tired. They drove home in silence. His father waited on the front porch. Harold Brennan, 52 years old, coal miner, veteran of the First World War. He'd fought at WWII. He understood what his son had experienced. The 1,000-yard stare. The emotional distance. The silence. "Welcome home, Daniel." "Thanks, Dad." They shook hands. No hug. Not their way. Harold studied his son and recognized what he saw. The boy he'd sent to war hadn't come back. This was someone else wearing his son's face. That first week home was torture. Neighbors stopped by to welcome him. They wanted to hear stories. Wanted to know what combat was really like. Wanted to congratulate him on surviving. Brennan answered their questions in monosyllables and disappeared to his room as soon as polite etiquette allowed. The local newspaper wanted to interview him. The hometown hero. The boy who'd fought from Normandy to the end. He refused. The editor persisted. Called the house daily. Brennan's mother finally told them to stop. Church felt impossible. The minister asked him to stand during the service. Recognition for his service. Everyone applauded. Brennan stood because it was expected. Sat down as quickly as possible. Never returned to church. His father tried to help. Took him fishing. They sat by the river in silence for hours. The quiet felt good. No questions. No congratulations. Just water and trees and sky. After a while Harold spoke. "I know what you're feeling." Brennan didn't respond. "After WWII I felt the same way. Guilty for surviving. Angry at everyone who didn't understand. Lost. How did you get past it?" "I didn't." "You don't get past it. You just learn to carry it." They sat in silence another hour. Caught nothing. It didn't matter. In July the town organized a celebration for all returning veterans. A picnic in the park. Food. Music. Speeches by local politicians. Brennan's mother insisted he attend. He went to make her happy. The celebration was grotesque. People laughed. Children played. A band played patriotic music while veterans stood awkwardly in their dress uniforms. The mayor gave a speech about sacrifice and freedom. Thanked the men who'd served. Called them heroes. Brennan left after 20 minutes. Walked home alone. Locked himself in his room. His younger brother, Thomas, found him there later that night. Thomas was 21, medically discharged after losing his leg. He maneuvered on crutches, still learning to walk with the prosthetic. He knocked on Daniel's door. "Can I come in?" "Yeah." Thomas entered and sat on the edge of the bed. "You okay?" "No." "Want to talk about it?" "Not really." Thomas nodded. "I get it. People here don't understand. They think we should be celebrating. Think we should be happy it's over." "Are you happy?" Brennan asked. "Some days. Other days I wonder why I'm here and my buddies aren't. Why I get to see another sunrise when they don't." Brennan looked at his brother. First person who'd understood. "Yeah. It's not fair," Thomas said. "None of it is fair. But we're here and they're not. We owe it to them to keep living. I don't know how to do that." "Neither do I. But we'll figure it out." They sat together in the dark. Two brothers who'd survived when they shouldn't have. Two young men trying to understand why random chance had chosen them to live. August 1945 brought news of Japan's surrender. The entire war was over. Truly over. The celebration that followed was even larger than VE Day. People poured into the streets. Sirens blared. Church bells rang for hours. The nightmare that had consumed the world since 1939 was finished. Daniel Brennan sat in his room and felt nothing. In September he received orders to report for final discharge processing. He traveled back to Camp Kilmer. Signed papers. Received his final pay. Accepted his honorable discharge and separation papers. Became a civilian again after 3 years, 2 months and 14 days in uniform. He returned home with no plan. No education beyond high school. No job skills except infantry tactics. No desire to do anything except sleep. His father got him work in the coal mines. The same job 3 generations of Brennan men had done before him. Dark. Dangerous. Exhausting. Perfect. The work required no emotional engagement. Just physical labor. Hours underground where nobody asked questions or expected conversation. Brennan worked in the mines for the next 42 years. He never married. Never had children. Never joined the VFW or American Legion. Never attended reunions. Never talked about the war except when directly asked, and then only in the briefest possible terms. In 1982, the 28th Infantry Division Association located him. They were planning a reunion for survivors of the Hürtgen Forest. Wanted him to attend. Share his experiences. Connect with other veterans who'd been there. He declined. They wrote again in 1984. Again in 1987. Each time he declined. He had nothing to say to those men. They'd survived different battles. Carried different guilt. Their presence would only remind him of the 41 who weren't there. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, a local television station contacted him. They were doing a segment on area veterans. Wanted to interview him about his experiences. Normandy. The Hürtgen. The Bulge. The whole war. He refused. The reporter was persistent. Called multiple times. Explained how important it was to preserve these stories. How future generations needed to hear from men who'd been there. How his experiences mattered. Brennan finally agreed to one condition. He would answer questions but they couldn't film his face. Could only record his voice. The reporter agreed. The interview lasted 17 minutes. Brennan's voice was flat. Emotionless. He described dates and locations. Unit designations. Tactical movements. But no personal details. No emotional context. Just facts delivered like a military briefing. The reporter asked about his platoon. The men he'd served with. What happened to them? They died, Brennan said. All of them? Yes. How did you survive when they didn't? Brennan was quiet for a long time. The reporter waited. Finally Brennan spoke. I don't know. I've spent 50 years trying to answer that question. I don't know why I lived and they died. There's no reason. No logic. Just chance. Pure random chance. And I've never forgiven myself for being the one who got lucky. The interview ended there. The segment aired once on local television. Brennan never watched it. In 1998, Thomas Brennan died of lung cancer at age 75. Daniel was 76. His only surviving sibling was gone. The last person who understood what it meant to carry survivor's guilt. He attended the funeral. Sat in the front row. Watched them lower his brother into the ground. Another name added to the list of people who'd left him behind. At the wake afterward, someone asked Daniel if he was okay. I'm fine, he said. The same answer he'd given for 54 years. In November 2002, Daniel Brennan suffered a massive stroke at his home. He was 81 years old. Lived alone. Hadn't spoken to a neighbor in weeks. The mailman found him 3 days later when mail accumulated in his box. He spent his final 6 days in the hospital. Conscious but unable to speak. Unable to move. Just lying there with his thoughts for company. Nurses came and went. Checked his vitals. Adjusted his 4. No visitors. No family left. No friends he'd allowed to remain close. On his last night, a young nurse noticed he was crying. She'd worked with him for 4 days. He'd never shown emotion before. She brought him tissues. Asked if he was in pain. He shook his head. She asked if she could do anything. He tried to speak. Couldn't form the words. Just tears running down his face. The nurse held his hand. Sat with him. After a while she began talking. Told him about her day. About her children. About small normal things happening in the world outside his room. Brennan listened. Tears continued falling. The nurse stayed past the end of her shift. She was still holding his hand when he died at 3:47 in the morning on November 22, 2002. 58 years to the day after his platoon was destroyed in the Hürtgen Forest. His obituary in the local paper was 3 sentences long. Daniel Everett Brennan. Age 81. Veteran of World War II. Survived by no immediate family. Services private. They buried him in the town cemetery. A handful of people attended. Mostly neighbors who remembered him vaguely. The funeral director. The minister who read a standard service over a man he'd never met. The Department of Veterans Affairs provided a headstone. Standard military issue. Name. Rank. Dates of service. Nothing about the Hürtgen. Nothing about the 41 men he'd lost. Nothing about the weight he'd carried for 58 years. Just stone and grass and sky. In 2015, a historian researching the 28th Infantry Division found Brennan's name in casualty reports from the Hürtgen Forest. Found the records showing he was the sole survivor from his original platoon. Found the discharge papers. The service record. The decorations he'd never mentioned. Bronze Star. Purple Heart. Combat Infantryman Badge. The historian tried to track down relatives. Found none. Tried to locate fellow veterans who'd known him. All deceased. Tried to find anyone who could provide personal details about Private First Class Daniel Everett Brennan. Found nothing. Just a name in an archive. A statistic from a war that killed millions. One more soldier who survived the fighting but never escaped the war. The historian included a footnote about Brennan in his book about the Hürtgen Forest. Mentioned him as an example of survivor's guilt. Of men who made it home but never truly left the battlefield. Of the invisible casualties that don't appear in official records. The book sold modestly. Academic audiences mostly. A few veterans. Some military historians. Brennan's name appeared on page 347, paragraph 3. For sentences about a man who spent 58 years trying to understand why he lived when his friends didn't. 4 sentences. That's all that remained of a lifetime of guilt. In the archives of the 28th Infantry Division Association, there's a roster from Company C, 2nd Battalion, 109th Infantry Regiment. The roster lists the names of every man who landed at Normandy in July 1944. 42 names total. 41 have death dates next to them. Killed in action between July 1944 and November 1944. The Hürtgen Forest claimed most of them. 31 men died in that forest over 19 days. One name has no death date. Just a notation, survived to discharge 1945. Daniel Everett Brennan. Private First Class. The man who refused to celebrate survival. He never forgave himself for being that one name. Never found peace with being the exception. Never understood why random chance chose him to live. But perhaps that's the wrong question. Perhaps the real question isn't why he survived. Perhaps the real question is what we owe to those who do survive. What we ask them to carry. What weight we place on them simply by celebrating their existence while forgetting those who fell beside them. Brennan carried that weight until it killed him. 58 years of guilt for being alive. 58 years of wondering why. 58 years of silence because no one wanted to hear that survival isn't always victory. Sometimes survival is just a different kind of loss. The war ended on May 8, 1945. But for Daniel Brennan it never ended. It just continued quietly. A private battle fought alone. A war that lasted 58 more years until a hospital room in Pennsylvania finally granted him the same peace his 41 friends had found in the forests of Germany. There's no memorial to Daniel Brennan. No plaque. No scholarship in his name. Just a headstone in a small-town cemetery that lists his service dates and nothing else. But his story matters. Because he represents thousands like him. Men who survived and spent the rest of their lives wondering why. Men who came home to celebrations they couldn't feel. Men who carried guilt that never diminished. We remember the ones who died. We should. Their sacrifice was absolute and final. But we forget the ones who survived and suffered. The ones who came home damaged in ways no medal could recognize. The ones who spent decades trying to answer a question that has no answer. Why did I live when they didn't? Daniel Brennan asked that question until the day he died. He never found an answer. Perhaps there isn't one. Perhaps the only truth is this: some men die in war. Some men survive. And sometimes the ones who survive carry the heavier burden. Not always, but sometimes.